I'm Dr. Elizabeth Dulemba, and I'm the Director of Graduate Programs in Children's Literature and Illustration here at Hollins University. And I'm so glad to have this year's Margaret Wise Brown Prize honor winner, Ævar Þór Benediktsson,
Yes, very nice.
all the way from Iceland, to celebrate his book, Stranded.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I mean, this is such an honor. So I didn't have any choice. I just had to come.
I love that. So hopefully we've been rolling out the red carpet for you
Yes,
since you got
you have. It's been wonderful.
here. We even brought in a few skunks for you.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
And some deers and something with a tail that disappeared into a bush and scared the bejesus out of me. So yeah, I love it.
Wonderful. So this is only your second picture book, although it's not your first book.
No, I've written a lot of books in Icelandic.
Mm-hmm.
Of those, there is one picture book where I was playing around with the alphabet and trying to make it a little bit more interesting and more dangerous. So that it's called The Extremely Dangerous Alphabet. And then Barefoot Book, Kate De Palma, my editor, found me on Twitter.
Fantastic.
And asked me if I had any ideas for a picture book that would take place in Iceland. And I pitched her some ideas, and she really liked this idea, which is based on a true story about my grandfather. And here we are.
So what can you give us the premise to the story real quick?
Yeah, this is a story that happens in 1964. My grandfather and his friend got a special permission from the government to photograph a brand new island right outside of Iceland. The island was maybe a year old, so it wasn't just a molten heap of lava. They could walk around on it, but the fisherman that was supposed to pick them back up, he forgot.
Oh dear.
So they got stranded on the island without almost any food or water, and they really weren't dressed for the occasion. So yeah.
But everybody survived in the end.
Yeah, otherwise I wouldn't be here. So it's very important that my grandfather survived, because it isn't until 3 years later that my mom comes into the picture. So he got back home. That's a good thing.
Yeah. But now you have a long history in books in Iceland. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I started writing about 12 years ago. I had been writing ever since I was little, but I started writing for real about 12 years ago, and it went really well. And what I try to do with my books is play around with form, both the form of how you read a book and also what is a book. So I write a lot of stories where the reader decides what happens, and I also try to play around with for example, there's a zombie series I have where if you look at the book, the corners have been chewed off. So but that grabs their attention, and then my job is done because I got their attention. So I'm very passionate about reading and promoting reading, and this is a part of that, trying to make books interesting, or even more interesting than they already are.
And you're getting books into a lot of hands of young readers.
Yeah,
Tell us a little bit more about how you're doing that.
For example, with the books where the readers decide what happens, like the Choose Your Own Adventure books, but I take them and I make them even bigger than they are here in the States. So they are maybe 500 pages, and they have more than 100 different endings. And what I didn't realize when I started, I wrote 8 of the big ones, and what I didn't realize when I started writing them was that kids that don't like reading really respond well to them, because they're like a video game, and also because of some of the horrible endings I write into the books. They are fun for the kids, and they're really fun for me to write. Those are the most the most fun to write, but also they are then talking about the books, and kids don't really, if you think about 12, 13, 14-year-olds, they're not really talking about books, but they're talking about those books for some reason, and they are saying, comparing notes. Where did you end up? Okay, no, I died here with a giant monster. Oh, well, I went into the pyramid and I saw this and this. So they are comparing notes like we did when we were kids and we were trying to beat video games. And the internet wasn't there, so we had to rely on a word of mouth. So that has been really fun, and it's a wave I've been trying to surf, trying to create interesting books and surprise my readers, so I don't get stuck in the same series for 20 years. Rather, I like to end them, and then I have to make something new and more interesting, and something that also makes me interested as an author and a creator. So yeah.
Yeah. But you have some reading initiatives that are going on that are getting books in a lot of kids' hands too.
Yeah, yeah. It's in Iceland, and I think around the world, kids' interest in reading is going downhill every year. And some years ago, I got the idea of doing a nationwide reading challenge because I had a TV show about science in Iceland, and it was really popular. So I decided.
He's a TV star too.
So I decided I'm going to use that power and not, be in commercials for Coca-Cola, but I'm going to promote reading because that's what I really am focused on. And this was almost before I started writing books. It was just because I loved books, and I wanted to emphasize how fun books could be. But every reading challenge, because we have sometimes in the summer we have read this summer, you could win a prize, but the prize was always a bunch of books. And if you don't like reading, a bunch of books isn't exciting. You don't want to win that prize. So I thought, if I find a clever prize, I'm going to do this. And then I read an interview with George R.R. Martin, and he was there was an auction, a charity auction, and his contribution to that was the highest bidder will be turned into a character in the next Game of Thrones book and killed instantly. And I thought, that's a good idea. So I announced that I would start a new series, and the character that I was in the TV show, he would be 11 years old in that book. So it's the young adventures of Ævar the scientist, and 5 children that took part and read, and you could read what you wanted to. That was really important. If comics are books, and you sent in tickets, you fill up tickets and send them to me, and then I would randomly select 5 kids, and they would be turned into characters in the books. And I did this for 5 years, and at the end there were more than 330,000 books read. At that time, that was about 1 book per every person in Iceland. So
because there's how many people in Iceland?
Now there's around 380,000.
Wow.
But then I finished in, I think, 2019, or 18. Then I had calculated it that it was almost 1 book per person. So that was pretty cool.
So you had quite the impact.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. And like I say, the slogan of the whole thing was read what you want to read. Because there's, as we know, there's nothing worse than having to read a book you don't want to read. Yeah. So it's...
well, we want you to read this one to us, please. And we have it here in Icelandic, too. You brought us a copy in Icelandic.
Yes.
Please read it to us in English, though, because most of our audience is going to understand the English version.
All right. Okay. Stranded, a mostly true story from Iceland. Everything in this story is true, except for one little thing. See if you can spot it. I will tell you what it is at the end. And I have to add, because it says so here on the page, and also because I just want to, the art is by Anne Wilson, and the pictures are beautiful. All right. This is a story about my grandfather, how he got stranded on a volcanic island, was almost turned into barbecue, and found the most important moment in the world. His name, like mine, was Ævar. It's a name that sounds a little bit like Ivan and a lot like eyewear, which is fitting because we both wear glasses. Our story is set in the year 1964, which by my estimation was at least 1,000 years ago. My calculations could be off. Before my grandfather became my grandfather, he was an explorer, a scientist and a photographer in Iceland. For those who have never been, Iceland is a small and beautiful island in the middle of nowhere, right between the Greenland Sea and the North Atlantic Ocean. The summers are cool, the winters are freezing, and everything in between is, let's be honest, pretty cold and wet. But I still love it. It's a land of fairies and magic, northern lights and volcanoes. Our language is one of the oldest languages that is still spoken today. We love stories of mythical creatures like trolls and elves. The story I like most is the one about the wishing moment. It says that there is one moment every day that is filled with magic. And if you can find that single, tiny, short and magical moment and make a wish right then, the wish will come true. One morning my grandfather woke up, turned on the radio and heard the greatest news he had ever heard. That is, until he heard that I was writing this book, of course. A volcanic eruption. But it got better. It's huge, and even better, it's underwater. So a brand new island is forming right next to Iceland. For most people, this news was met with the following thought. Oh, how interesting. I will observe this new development from a safe distance because, as everybody knows, volcanoes are very dangerous. For my grandfather, however, this news meant only one thing. I must go there. A few months passed. The island was now a proper island and not an extremely hot heap of molten lava. It had been named Surtsey after a fire giant from Norse mythology named Surtur. My grandfather and his friend had received special permission from the government to visit it. The volcano was still active, but they promised to be careful. To get to the island, they hitched a ride with a local fisherman, like you do, who promised to pick them back up the next day. It was summer, the sun was shining, and my grandfather and his friend were excited. They were both interested in nature, they both had their cameras, and they were both certain this would be a trip to remember. They waved goodbye to the fisherman and started to explore. It was amazing. It was a brand new island, still growing, slowly filling with life. My grandfather had on his best purple boots, and since he didn't want to ruin them, he had a very strict rule for walking around Surtsey. If the bottom of your boots started melting, you probably If the bottom of your boots started melting, you probably should be standing somewhere else. Which is, when I think about it, a good rule for life in general, not just when you're visiting an island that is more or less an active volcano. My grandfather and his friend walked around snapping photos. Day turned into night. It got pretty cold, but they kept moving. Sorry. I've been speaking a lot today.
Yeah.
Okay. Day turned into night. It got pretty cold, but they kept moving, keeping themselves warm by climbing and exploring. They were so excited that they didn't sleep a wink. They just kept on taking pictures. Finally, night turned back into day. As the morning sun greeted them, they were so tired that they couldn't possibly take any more pictures. The two friends started walking back to shore. The fisherman would surely be coming shortly. Except that he didn't. My grandfather and his friend waited and waited and waited. Finally, they knew for certain the fisherman wasn't coming. And now, dear reader, I know what you are thinking. Boom! I found it. This is the one thing in the book that isn't true. Surely the fisherman was waiting for them at the shore and brought them right back home to safety. Nope. My grandfather and his friend realized they would have to stay another night on the island. But they had 4 problems. Number 1, they didn't have any water, only 2 bottles of juice. Number 2, the only food they had left was a single orange and some chocolate. Number 3, their coats weren't very warm and it was getting very cold. Number 4, the volcano was still active. Number 4 probably should have been at the top of the list. So this is how they solved them. Number 1, they drank the juice. Number 2, they ate the orange and the chocolate. Number 3 and 4, they decided to sleep next to the volcano. Yes, you read that right. Next to the volcano. Now, I know that you are again thinking this is the one thing in the book that's not true. I found it. Never mind the thing about the fisherman. Nope. This is also true. It happened. Even though it was summer, it was freezing cold at night. And an active volcano is the perfect thing to keep you warm, right? It really isn't. My grandfather and his friend walked as close to the running lava as they dared. The ground was very rocky, and for a moment my grandfather closed his eyes and wished he had brought his bed with him. Maybe he would get lucky and stumble upon the magic wishing moment. He opened his eyes and looked around. No such luck. When they didn't dare walk closer, they decided to set up camp. They had to be careful, though, as the volcano was spitting up molten lava as high as the clouds. Their plan was simple. They found themselves a comfy spot on the rocky ground and decided to use their coats as pillows. Then they decided that they would take turns sleeping and watching the lava, just in case the lava in the air and the running lava on the ground got too close and turned them into a human barbecue. But then they both fell asleep. Maybe it wasn't the best plan. The morning after, they both awoke. Luckily, no one had been barbecued. The ground around them was very warm, and when my grandfather went into his coat pocket to fetch his glasses, he couldn't find them. All he could find were 2 pieces of glass and a twisted string of plastic. It took him a moment to realize. His glasses had melted in the night. And yes, I know what you are thinking. Now this is the thing in the book that is not true. Nope, it's true. It really happened. Cold, thirsty, and hungry, my grandfather and his friend walked around the small island all day, waiting for the fishermen who never came. The following night, even more freezing and starving than the night before, they ventured closer to the active volcano. They lay together on their backs and watched the lava dancing in the night sky like some fire-red northern lights. My grandfather closed his eyes and wished he still had his glasses. Maybe this time he would get lucky and stumble upon the magic-filled moment of the day. He opened his eyes and looked around. No such luck. He didn't mind, though. The sky was beautiful, even though it was a little blurry. The following morning, my grandfather and his friend woke up exhausted. They had now been alone on the island for more than 48 hours, with hardly any food or water. Just to do something, they set their sights on a big hill in the middle of the island. Maybe they could call for help from the top. Maybe somebody on the mainland would be looking at the island with binoculars and notice them. When they were halfway up the hill, my grandfather turned to his friend and joked, "I wish that when we reach the top, we would be greeted with something to eat. Maybe some nice, hot soup." And he closed his eyes for the 3rd time since they arrived on this strange and beautiful island and repeated the wish, shouting it as loud as you can shout something in your mind. My grandfather opened his eyes and looked around. No such luck. The friends laughed and kept on walking. But then a truly wondrous thing happened. The moment they reached the top of the hill, they spotted a man walking up the other side. "Well, there you are," shouted the man happily as he reached the top. "I heard there might be some castaways stranded on the island. I'm glad I found you." My grandfather and his friend couldn't believe their eyes, especially when this mystery man reached into his backpack and pulled out a giant thermos. "You want some soup?" My grandfather and his friend looked at each other, then back at the stranger. Then they started smiling. "I guess I found it," thought my grandfather. It turned out that this mystery man was from the United States. He had come to the island earlier that morning by helicopter, along with some scientists, to explore. They had landed on the other side of the island, so my grandfather and his friend hadn't heard them. Some will say that this was a lucky coincidence. I say that my grandfather finally found the magic wishing moment. And yes, I know what you are thinking. Now come on, this has got to be the thing in the book that is not true. It just has to be. But no, this is also true. In the end, my grandfather and his friend arrived safely back on the mainland. They never found out why the fisherman didn't come back for them. Maybe he simply forgot. My grandfather didn't care. He was just happy he was back home. And so was my grandmother. And that is the story of how my grandfather got stranded on a volcanic island, was almost turned into barbecue, and found the most important moment in the world. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. The one thing in this extraordinary story that is not true, my grandfather's best boots, they weren't purple. They were green. Everything else is true.
Fabulous.
Thank you. And then here we have some end matter about Iceland and volcanoes and Norse mythology.
Well, just out of curiosity, can you read like the first page in Icelandic?
Yes.
Because I think it would be really wonderful for our viewers just to hear what it sounds like in your
That I
native
can.
language.
All right. Þetta sagan það. Þegar afi minn varð strandaglópur á Eldfjallaeyju, grillaðist næstum því og hitti á mikilvægustu sekúndu í heimi. Afi minn heitir Ævar, alveg eins og ég, en það ekki samt það eina sem við eigum sameiginlegt. Við elskum báðir þjóðsögur og dularfull fyrirbæri og svo erum við báðir frægir fyrir það að klára alltaf af diskonum okkar. Alltaf.
That is so cool sounding. I love the sound of that language. It's
Great.
beautiful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you so much for making the trip to America to
Yeah,
come
my pleasure, and thank you so much for this great honor.
Well, we loved having you, and we love the book. And I think for your second book to be getting so many accolades and so much attention.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Obviously, you've got more good things ahead of you. So
Yeah, let's hope so.
we look forward to seeing them.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching.